Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Juggernaut Books and Center for Policy Research, we are happy to welcome everyone this evening. Um, I don't know if many of you know of Juggernaut Books. We are a very new publishing house, and we publish books that you can read digitally as well as on the telephone, and also physical books. And we inaugurated our physical publishing list with Husain Haqqani's India versus Pakistan. It's a fascinating book, provocative in the way that only Husain can be, and an absolute delight to read and illuminating. So that's us, and Pratap, please.
Good evening. It's a great privilege to be introducing this panel. First, just kind of begin with a couple of apologies. Unfortunately, Suhasini Haider can't join us today. She's had a personal emergency and very understandable reasons. We might try to ventriloquize her questions at some point during the discussion, but we hope we will have a rich discussion nevertheless, and Shekhar should be here momentarily. It is, as I said, a great privilege and pleasure to introduce this panel. This book, absolutely wonderful book, India or sort of versus Pakistan. And I mean, the cover itself is enigmatic. Why can't we just be friends? And there are many registers in which you can read that question. Is that question meant ironically? Is that question meant sincerely? Is that question meant as a kind of standing eternal joke on the state of India-Pakistan relations? Is that meant as a sincere hope for the future? We will hope to unpack, in a sense, some of these dilemmas during this course of this discussion. This is, as I said, a wonderful book. It's wonderful at many levels. It's a provocative argument about the dynamics of India-Pakistan relations. It's written with a succinctness and verve that only Haqqani Saab can kind of master. Even in the space of a short book, it manages to refer to new material. Almost everything reported in the book is sort of founded in, as it were, facts and serious evidence, not just speculation. So those kind of qualities alone, I think, would make it an important book, short though it is. But if you're looking for a short, sharp, clear introduction to what are the issues that define this India-Pakistan relationship, I cannot recommend a better book than this. But we are also having this discussion, I think, at a moment that's hard to describe. We seem to be in cul-de-sacs of different kinds. There is very clearly a political cul-de-sac in the India-Pakistan relationship. Sure, talks are proceeding. Mr. Rajnath Singh will go to the SAARC meeting. There's stuff happening. But there is the sense, overwhelming sense, that there is a kind of political dead in this relationship, that there's a kind of bad script that's going to kind of repeat itself in different forms again, moments of dialogue, moments of break off, back again. So that sense of being in a political cul-de-sac, and I think the big pressing question, are there any creative ways out of this? Is there a political will and capacity and leadership to actually confront this cul-de-sac? I think that's a very real cul-de-sac. But more than, I think, the political cul-de-sac, which we have been very familiar for a very long time, there is also something happening, I guess, in all our countries, not just India, Pakistan, but something globally at this moment, which adds a kind of added pressure to discussions like this. Very frankly, in India, public discourse has reached a point where even posing the question, why can't we just be friends, is considered by mainstream media as a seditious act. And this phenomenon is for real. It's not a joke anymore, right? When you have the incitement of vigilantism merely because somebody is a dove, or merely because somebody is posing uncomfortable questions, This is actually an unprecedented situation in our democracy. And added to all the kinds of pressures that we are talking about, right, that already mark this relationship, to have this new phenomenon kind of bubble in our public discourse, I think is something worth thinking about. What consequences it might actually have for this relationship. By some definitions, all of you just by being here are committing a seditious act. It's truly extraordinary situation, I think, in our public discourse. There's a kind of emotional cul-de-sac, right, where a great sense of fatigue with the subject as well, a sense of kind of suffocation, right? There is no major political breakthrough. The terms of political discourse are actually hardening rather than softening. The passage of time and the shift in generations, which we hoped would have taken away some of the bitterness of partition and those who lived under the shadow of partition. We really thought that you have the first genuine post-colonial generation, the first genuine post-partition generation, right? Whether that would provide a political opportunity to think our way out of this conundrum which we have locked ourselves, and a conundrum which is exacting a serious toll on both our countries. I think it'd be foolish to pretend that India-Pakistan relations are not a major political issue in both our countries. They limit our horizons of possibility. They drag us down. To be honest, the state of this relationship does psychically mutilate our countries. The nature of public discourse, what we can dream for, what we can hope for. So I think it is worth remembering what's at stake, even in a slim book like this. And this book does a marvelous job of tracing the history of that relationship from the early stages of, the post-partition absent-mindedness where Jinnah could still dream of, owning a house in India. People would move freely across the borders. Where partition would be, in a sense, a political and fact, but it would not permeate itself as totally it has into the severing of economic relationships, social relationships, cultural relationships. So we had that very brief moment of absent-mindedness to the phase of consolidation of military rule in Pakistan and what implications it had for India and Pakistan relationships. And then post-71, the beginning of a new kind of relationship between the military and radical Islam in Pakistan, and again, its dynamics there. In a sense, on the Indian side, and I think one of the interesting things about the book is the way it tries to capture the way that the two discourses are dialectically linked. On the Pakistani side, the perception that India has never been sincere in its acceptance of Pakistan. To what extent is that proposition true? To what extent does that proposition still govern the reality of politics, even if it's not something that official policy buys in. This book does a remarkable job of, I think, confronting those questions. So we look forward to a wonderful discussion. What we'll do is I'll first invite Ambassador Haqqani, who needs no introduction, but just 2 lines. He's been a distinguished journalist. He was an extraordinary ambassador, served in Sri Lanka, Pakistan's ambassador in the United States. One CV characterization of him on the web, I just read somewhere, said the only thing you don't need to know about him is that he's persona non grata with the Pakistani state. You can read into that whatever you wish. He has also been an extraordinary academic. He taught at Boston University and is the author of really a wonderful series of works, Magnificent Delusions, the history of relationship, the United States-Pakistan relationship, is really a kind of model of how you write books of that kind, both in the depth of its scholarship and the clarity of its argument. So we are very privileged to have him here. So we'll begin by inviting Ambassador Haqqani to just give a kind of opening statement about the book, and then we'll jump into the panel discussion. Shekhar must probably have misjudged Delhi traffic. Last message was he should be here, so hopefully he'll join us. But I'm also delighted that Ashoke is with us. between Ashok, Suhasini, and Shekhar, we had hoped to get three of the most knowledgeable observers of Pakistan in India, and probably the three people who can still have a sober discussion with about Pakistan, who are not associated with official circles. And I think we will benefit a great deal from that. So, Ambassador Haqqani, congratulations on your book, and
thank you for that very kind introduction, Bob. It's a pleasure being among friends. I have several friends in India, many of whom are in the audience, and I also consider myself very lucky and blessed that Hazrat Nazim Nizami from the Dargah of Hazrat Nizamuddin Aulia decided to come on this special occasion for me, and I have a special association with that Dargah as well as with this city. Which is where all my ancestors except my father is buried, the city of Delhi. And in some ways, the India-Pakistan relationship is something that I not only think about, but I feel, as do many other Pakistanis. So when I was asked to write this book, and it was Chiki Sarkar's idea when she was starting Juggernaut, and she said, "You say so much about this subject, why don't you write a short book?" And I said, "Well, a short book can only be a primer." And she said, "Absolutely, because people don't really know this relationship." And then I thought about it, and my experience as Pakistan's ambassador to the US, where I was actually dealing with Americans whom I love, but like the rest of the world, occasionally get very disturbed about, because Americans are a unique nation. They are a nation which has a very special relationship with history. It's the only country in the world where when you say that's history, what you really mean is that's irrelevant. And the truth is that history is very relevant, and the Americans have, in my humble opinion, contributed adversely to the India-Pakistan equation, as I will explain in a bit, not intentionally, but quite inadvertently, by not understanding the dynamics. So I thought if I will write a primer, it will be useful for Pakistanis to read, because Pakistan over the years has built a certain national narrative. And that national narrative has become all about what was done to Pakistan rather than what Pakistan has ever done. And Indians need to read it because they need to understand that India is not without blame in some of the problems between India and Pakistan, because they have missed several opportunities as well. But the purpose is essentially to try and make sure that both Indians and Pakistan realize what's at stake. We are both nuclear-armed countries now. We started out essentially as manifestations of a political quarrel. Basically, the Muslim League and the Indian National Congress did not agree on what should be the formula for governing India post the British. Out of it was born the two-nation theory. The Muslim League decided that it will only speak for Muslims. Two-nation theory in some ways the seed had been planted with the starting of separate electorates, which obviously is always a recipe for disaster, because if you're going to say everybody will vote only for their community, then it means that the hardest line person in that community can actually mobilize that community around certain hardline ideas, and that was how the seed was planted. In 1947, when partition occurred, three very important factors set the stage for this relationship not being what some people thought it could be. And among those people who thought it could be a different relationship was Pakistan's founder, Muhammad Ali Jinnah. On the one hand, he had led the campaign for the separation and the creation of Pakistan. On the other hand, when the first American ambassador arrived and saw him and asked him what would be the relationship between Pakistan and India be like, he said, "Oh, after a little bit of quarreling, the two of us will settle down to a relationship similar to that between the United States and Canada," which of course is a model relationship. The two countries have occasional disputes, but usually it's over whether you're going to cheer for the New York Yankees or the Toronto Blue Jays in a baseball game. And they have an open border, a non-militarized border, tremendous military and police cooperation, etc. Certainly no effort by one to try and debilitate the other, and certainly not for one trying to export terrorism to the other. The other comment came from Mahatma Gandhi, the founder of modern India. And he said well, I don't want Pakistan to be created, I don't want India to be divided, but since it's happening, let India treat Pakistan the way a family would treat a member of the family living in a joint family who goes and sets up his own home. So let's not make that member of the family feel they are not members of the family. They are not outcasts. Let's try and keep them inside the family while they are living away. But this was only at the political and ideal level. Practically, what was happening, the partition actually gave Pakistan 17% of British India's resources, 19-20% of British India's population, 33% of British India's army. The army that had been created for the Second World War had not yet been demobilized. And while getting that large army did not create the kind of problem for India that it did for Pakistan, I think in some ways that set the stage for the relationship, because now 33% of the army, Pakistan had a unique situation. It was not a country that would raise an army to face threats that were facing the country. It actually had to have threats to be able to justify the army that it had already inherited. And that's how this problem started. And then, of course, there was the Muslim League's unpreparedness for partition. The Muslim League had done no homework. If you see the boundary commission meetings, the Muslim League had very little preparation for how the boundary should be done. Mr. Jinnah simply did not anticipate communal riots. He did not anticipate transfer of populations. He did not anticipate ethnic cleansing in Punjab, which resulted in almost no Muslims being left in eastern Punjab, and no Hindus and Sikhs left on the Pakistani side. Originally, Pakistan would have had 23% non-Muslims if there had been no movement of population. So these these populations that witnessed this slaughter obviously became constituencies of anger, if not hatred, against the other. And then the Muslim League had done no preparation for the accession of princely states. So the day Pakistan was created, only one teeny-weeny little princely state in Swat in the northwest frontier had decided that it was joining Pakistan, and that was because its ruler, the Wali, was very pro-Muslim League. His family still play a role in the Muslim League in Pakistan. And so he decided to join. The rest of them were not yet ready. There had been no negotiation. What will you decide? So there were no accession agreements. And with Kashmir, there was a standstill agreement which was violated the moment Pakistan decided to try and use force by sending the Lashkars. And that has been a dispute. Now, where do the Americans wander into the relationship? In my first book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, and since this is, book events are all about promoting books, so let me promote not just this one. This is a short, nice, small book, easy to read, about 2.5 to 3 hours for the average reader, 175 pages, full of tremendous, at least I think they're tremendous anecdotes that actually explain through the anecdotes the relationship and the problems and the potential. But my first book, Pakistan Between Mosque and Military, which has also been republished recently, updated to 2016, explains how it happened. So here's a country that's created without much preparation, and its elite decided it had to keep this army, but they don't have the money because the resources or share of resources is much less than the size of the army. So they come up with a template, and the template is, we're going to keep this country together in the name of religion, because after all, the Muslim League slogan before 1947 had been Islam in danger. So they said, now our slogan is going to be Pakistan in danger. This is going to be a country that is going to be permanently in a state of threat and danger. And you can see that in Pakistan. If you see the discourse, I mean, aside from the fact that now you have some screamers on your television who can actually match the Pakistani screamers, but the fact of the matter is that this it has been going on a lot longer on the Pakistan side, where a narrative has been created, and Pratap was very right in saying that it's unfortunate that people like me are abused in Pakistan, and people like him probably are abused in India. Anybody who says a wave of hyper-nationalism has swept us, both. But in case of Pakistan, that hyper-nationalism was actually cultivated over a long period of time. And that was part of that paradigm. So first is, we have to build a nation. How do we build a nation? After all, there was no Pakistan before 1947. How do we make people feel they are Pakistanis? By making them feel they are under threat. And Islam is the national unifier. And then the third part of that paradigm was, we need somebody to pay for our country. And Uncle Sam was the benefactor that Pakistan approached. So my second book is Pakistan and the United States, explains the relationship. How did the United States actually get involved in all of this? And the Americans always assumed when the Pakistanis said, well, we'll be all right. The relationship is going to become normal if you help us solve Kashmir. I point out that on many an occasion, in the book, and I'm not going to give away any of the items of the book, because my son, once he and I were walking in a bookshop and somebody actually was buying my book, and my son made a joke which has actually stayed with me. He said, "Oh, Dad, do you get something for every time you sell a book?" I said, "Yes, I do. Theoretically, I do if the publishers are honest." So he said, "Good. Well, then my inheritance just increased a little bit with that book sale." So therefore, I'm not going to give away the book so that each one of you buys a copy. It's pretty affordable from what I hear. But there are many anecdotes in it about how on Kashmir actually there have been talks about how there can be a resolution, but that resolution was not seized by those who say it is the core problem. And my explanation for that is that describing something as the core problem and then not resolving it is essentially reflective of something else, which is not a desire to resolve it. I talk about the 1963 negotiations between Soran Singh and Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. The Americans had a tremendously detailed account of it. Some of the Indian participants and some of the Pakistani participants have written about those talks as well. And it's a reflection of how at that time, for example, the Indian side offered 5,000 square miles of territory to Pakistan to redefine the line of control, and it wasn't accepted by the Pakistani side. And why do I think that is? Well, I think that Kashmir is not the core problem, but it is the symptom of the problem. And the problem essentially is Pakistan's elite and Pakistan's military in particular needing the Indian threat to justify its control over Pakistan. And on the other hand, the Indians' sort of disregard and unwillingness to look at the psychological factors affecting the Pakistani side. So Indians go about their own business. I mean, sometimes I consider it, I say every time, when I was younger, every time I met an Indian and an Indian said to me, we are the same, we should be part of the same country, I would say, hold off on that one. It's going to cause tremendous problems for people back home because that's what they are afraid of. And then now when people say, well, we don't want to be different countries. We don't even think Pakistan is important. And I go again, oh God, don't say that either, because that kind of creates another pathology there. So the bottom line is that I think that the pathologies between the Muslim League and the Congress Party became the pathologies between two countries. And as a Pakistani, I feel it's not good for Pakistan. It certainly is not good for India as well, even if, as some Indians say, Pakistan is unimportant to us, because neighbors cannot completely ignore each other. And they're always affected by one another. Now, there are logical solutions to our problems. Most importantly, we need to be friends before we start discussing our disputes. Most nations have succeeded in doing that. Taiwan and China have not yet resolved whatever the dispute is between them. The fact that Taiwan doesn't think China is communists were the legitimate rulers of China, or the Chinese don't think that Taiwan should be this renegade province. But they do business with one another, and the Chinese, they hang out with one another, and that has kept conflict away, and maybe it might actually lead to the resolution of the conflict at some point. The Americans and the Soviets in the good old Cold War also actually started interacting with one another first, and then talked about finding solutions. Of course, the solution there came in the form of the collapse of the Soviet Union. In case of Pakistan and India also, Pakistan's mantra of resolve the core disputes first and then have friendship, in my opinion, is unrealistic. You have to have friendship first, and that will lead to resolution of disputes. On the Indian side, I think India needs to make a special effort to try and not get trapped by the notion of reciprocity. We will only do what Pakistan does. So what that does is, well, now that Pakistanis are going a little, whenever the temperatures rise there, there's a theory here, we should increase the temperature here because that's the only way the other side is going. No, you are actually playing to them. You are playing into their hands, because by increasing your temperatures, you are signaling that those who believe in India as an eternal enemy are right, whereas I believe that they are not. Now, what's my role in all of this? Why am I willing to do this? Why am I willing to write this? Why am I willing to be abused on Pakistani television channels like some of your people do? I mean, those of your people who get believed, they get paid highly by another TV channel to get abused by somebody else on the other channel. I don't. Why? I'll tell you why. The more I have studied conflicts, the more convinced I am that conflicts are resolved by the courage of those who are willing to point out the error of their own side. If everybody falls for a hyper-nationalist argument, then there will never be a resolution. So, for example, it was Americans who thought we can't always rattle sabers, we have to talk to the Soviets, who paved the way for detente. It was Russians or Soviets who thought, you know what, we can't completely ignore the Americans and we have to deal with them, who actually paved the way, the dissidents. China, it was people who thought, Deng Xiaoping, who was considered a dissident by Mao, who thought that, you know, China needs America more than America needs peace with China. And that's how arguments are built. So I'm building this argument, you know. And in any case, since my side has decided to throw me out, it's easier for me to make that argument sitting out, because back home they can control the discourse. In conclusion, what do I see as the future? Well, most people are interested in the immediate future. My prediction forecast about the immediate future is that there will be no forward movement, because Pakistan's internal dynamic would not allow it. It's not about leaders, it's not about individuals. Every time there's a change of leadership, some people get new theories come. I remember the time when Benazir Bhutto was elected in Pakistan, Rajiv Gandhi was prime minister here. There was a popular theory, which some of the people in this audience actually wrote, that for the first time we have the post-partition generation running both countries. Now the problem will be solved. Guess what? The problem didn't get solved. An uprising in Kashmir became the focus of everything, and then we saw things develop a different way. Then there was the whole assumption that Nawaz Sharif, the hardline Muslim League leader, and Atal Bihari Vajpayee, the Hindu nationalist leader of India, will be the right two people, because they're both conservative, right-wing people representing their respective right-wing constituencies. They will be able to make peace. We all know what happened after that. And then there was the assumption that both have tested nuclear weapons. That will make a solution possible. And more recently, there was the assumption that General Pervez Musharraf, who combines in his personality the military leader as well as the leader of the government, well, he can surely cut a deal. But we know what happened with that. The deal was negotiated according to everybody who participated in the negotiation, but never consummated. You know, those of you who have had long relationships that have not resulted in marriage probably know that if there's the 2 to 3 year rule. If after 3 years of engagement the marriage doesn't happen, the chances that it will actually take place reduce considerably. Those who want to get married do. Those who don't, they can just prolong the, you know, this is the reason, that's the reason. What then is the way forward? Well, I think 3 things. First of all, Pakistan's international friends, the United States in particular, but even China and others, they have to help Pakistan overcome its internal dysfunction. Pakistan is dysfunctional, not in the sense that it doesn't have a strong army. It does have a strong army, but that's all it has. 1/3 of our school-going age children don't go to school. Our human development indicators are poor. We are heavily indebted to other countries. Our economy moves in fits and starts. 5 years of good economy, 5 years of bad. Sounds something like from the Bible, you know, 7 years of famine and 7 years of prosperity. And so basically, Pakistan's dysfunction, everybody has to basically help with that rather than reinforce it. And how do people reinforce it? I've pointed out in my book, every time the US thought, oh, Pakistan is feeling insecure, let's give them some more weapons, because that will make them feel more secure, and then they will be able to talk. Look, if nuclear weapons do not make Pakistan feel secure, then that security is not about means and methods, it's a psychological insecurity. And a psychological insecurity needs a very different treatment than the insecurity of nations who have a practical insecurity, how to draw borders, how to have technical means to deal with threats, etc., etc. So that's the first. Deal with that dysfunction, stop promoting that dysfunction, recognize it, deal with it, try and reduce it. Second, I think that you need more voices like mine and people like myself on the other side. People who actually say, you know what, if we start believing that we are eternal enemies, there is nothing that will stop us from becoming eternal enemies, because belief always ends up sort of reinforcing the worst. So we actually have to start thinking about, we have 5,000 years of shared history and only 69 years of partition. And therefore, there is no reason why the other elements of 5,000 years of shared history will not prevail. And third essentially is that the objectives of both sides have to change. The Indian objective should not be to make Pakistanis feel or recognize that they made a mistake. It's been too long. I mean, 70 years is too little for an eternal conflict, but it's too long for a country to stop thinking of itself as a country. I was born in Pakistan. If my parents had not moved from India to Pakistan, I probably would have been an Indian, but I wasn't. I'm a Pakistani. That's the only nationality I know. It's not going to change. And so, if you see Pakistan's demographic profile, the people who have any personal experience or personal first-hand knowledge of partition is very small. More than 85% of Pakistan's population today is post-partition. So these people have only a reinforced narrative in their ears. It's not something they have lived through. So there's no reason for them to be angry except what they are told. So if that telling changes, things will change, Pakistan's national narrative. So all I'm saying is change the national narratives. And on the Pakistani side, Pakistan has to start having the objective of increasing the prosperity and happiness of its people, instead of having the goal that it is somehow going to become an equal to India. I personally cite an example that France and Belgium. If Belgium had decided many decades ago that its objective is going to be France's equal. If France makes nuclear weapons, Belgium is going to make nuclear weapons. If France gets into the NSG, Belgium is going to get into the NSG. If France becomes a permanent member of the Security Council, Belgium will become a... Belgium would have to produce a whole lot more chocolate than it does to reach that goal. So all I want is for my country to have a more realistic goal, a more honest and achievable goal, instead of an unrealistic goal that has mired my nation in conflict. Since I never have a conversation without citing Urdu poetry, I have to say that the way I feel is, there's a beautiful couplet in Urdu, and most people understand Urdu even if they don't speak it, that, teri dua hai ke ho teri arzu puri. Teri dua hai ke ho teri arzu puri, meri dua hai teri arzu badal jaye. So folks in Pakistan have these goals about, we have to be equal, we have to get all of Kashmir, this, that, etc. And my prayer and desire is, change the goal. Start paying attention to the prosperity of the people of Pakistan if you can. How do we get from here to there? That's the subject of another book. And you'll all have to pay another 499 rupees for that when it comes. But jokes aside, it's not going to be easy. And it's the interim period that we have to get through. And in that, we will occasionally see some blood and fire. And we have to manage that. Pakistan has to absolutely shut down and get out of the business of terrorism for its own sake. Because if we are going to have young people who are armed to shoot and kill in the name of religion, they will also shoot and kill in Pakistan in the name of religion. They will become equal opportunity haters. You start by making them hate India, then the next they start hating America, then they start hating somebody else, then they start hating minorities within Pakistan, and it's going to be troublesome for Pakistan. I think India should also be out of denial about unrest and unease in Kashmir. There is unhappiness in Kashmir that India has to deal with. It can't always be blamed on Pakistan. So if Pakistan has to end terrorism, India has to end policies that help every now and then feed the Pakistani narrative and make it about Kashmir. And then we can actually get on with the practical things of life. And the practical things of life would be that the SAARC region has only 5% of its trade within the region. Compare that with the ASEAN region, which has 25%, or the European Union, which has 50% of the trade among the participants. North America, the NAFTA countries, Mexico, Canada, and the United States, have 50% of their trade is among themselves. But above all, it's important to go beyond the screaming narratives and go for facts. And if I can be bold enough, as a Pakistani, take the risk of being abused by some of my countrymen, to actually point out how my side has made certain mistakes, I hope that there will be bold people on the Indian side who will occasionally say, we have made some mistakes too, because you cannot have dialogue between two people, both of whom say, we are absolutely right, me did nothing wrong. And the fact that we both have these attitudinal problems actually brings me to the original subject. We are far more similar than the hardliners in both countries are willing to acknowledge. So therefore, one's behavior feeds the others, and this kind of goes in cycles, and we are in a relatively bad cycle right now. I hope that this cycle does not last too long. The people of Kashmir in particular should not be used as a football between hardliners in Pakistan and hardliners in India. They deserve a decent life whichever way they can get it. So I hope that in the end I have made some contribution through this book to the understanding of the underlying dynamic, and probably also I hope I succeed in creating some fear amongst those who are fearless about this relationship, that this could become worse unless we do something about it. Thank you all very much for coming.
We'll just open up the panel discussion. I'll just invite Ashoke to begin the discussion, move to Shekhar, and then hopefully we can take some questions from the floor. I go there? Wherever you're comfortable.
Good evening. Thank you, Husain, for a wonderful set of remarks, and thank you, CPR and Juggernaut, for inviting me. Husain Haqqani is an out-of-work journalist who lives in exile and churns out one readable book after the other. I share one of those attributes. He has to teach me at least one of the others. Before I start speaking about the book and about the broader theme we're discussing here, I'd like to recommend that an Indian be asked to write a compliment to this book. And I'm not selling myself, there are better people who can do it. But I'll tell you why. Because Husain Haqqani is a very fair man. He places more of the blame for this dysfunctional relationship on Pakistan than on India, which to some degree is true, because the problem really begins, the 69-year-old problem begins with two-nation theory, which has remained a bone of contention, an argument between Indians and Pakistanis. We define our countries differently. The so-called ideology of Pakistan, which Husain Haqqani refers to in his book, which the army has created and sustained in Pakistan, is a major problem. We know all of that. Having said that, as he suggested towards the end of his remarks, there is also need for an Indian view of this dynamic. Not so much to go through past history and see that history with some sympathy as to the mistakes we've also made, though more of the mistakes may well have been made by the Pakistani army and by the Pakistani governments, but also to have India assess what it wants to do with South Asia, what is its strategic vision for South Asia, even if it doesn't have the instruments to realize or actualize that vision now or for perhaps decades to come. But as a conversation with ourselves, we need to have that. We need to have that discussion. And I think a compliment to this book by an Indian is also important and necessary. I can't summarize the book or read out anecdotes from the book or read out stories from the book or even whole paragraphs from the book without threatening Husain Haqqani's son's inheritance. So I don't want to do that, and he summarized the book so eloquently himself. There's no point me repeating it. I'd like to list or recount 4 or 5 anecdotes here. These anecdotes are important to me, at least because each of them flows from an observation following visits to Pakistan in recent years. And each of them was something that came back to me while reading this book. So each of these anecdotes is rooted in something I read in Husain Haqqani's book, which I hope you do too, and I think tells a broader story. The first anecdote is to do with history, what I would call the denialism of history. The next two with identity or the ambiguity of identity. And the third one is economics or the absence of economics, really, the heresy of economics in Pakistan. Husain Haqqani's parents are from the land we now call India. My parents are from the land we now call Pakistan. On my first trip to Pakistan about 4 or 5 years ago, I was in Islamabad for a conference, and I asked the High Commission here for special permission to visit Rawalpindi, where my mother and my father separately grew up. And they were kind enough to grant me permission, even though, as it turned out, the Afghan president was in Pakistan and in Rawalpindi on the same day. But nevertheless, I was not following the Afghan president. I was trying to find my mother's house and my father's house. I found my mother's house fairly easily. My father's house, where father was from a much more humble background, I found his mohalla, but I couldn't quite find the house. There were many houses of a similar nature, and I'd been given very vague directions, including by my last surviving uncle, who said it was bang opposite Saifuddin's shop. Now, that, as you know, Saifuddin's shop was rather difficult to find 70 years later. When I left the Marriott Hotel in Islamabad and I hired a car to go to Rawalpindi, I was asked, of course, do you have special permission, or do you have a visa to go to Rawalpindi? I said, I do. So they gave me a driver. They also gave me someone for my security. I realized quickly enough this was someone from the local police station who'd been asked to keep an eye on me. So when we drove to Rawalpindi, they said, why do you want to go to Rawalpindi? I said, my parents used to live here many years ago. So they said, okay, now do they live in Singapore or Dubai or America? I said, no. They actually dead and gone. I said, okay, so where did you grow up and where do you live? I said, I live in India. I said, okay, you now live in India. So when did your parents leave? They left in the 60s, 70s? I said, no, they left in 47. 47 made no sense to them. They said, they left in 47. Then finally I told them, actually they left when partition happened, the countries broke up. So that's when the penny dropped and they realized I was a Hindu. So after which they were very helpful. I mean, they realized I wasn't a spy, so they were very helpful. They tried very hard to get me to find my father's house and Saifuddin's shop, which nobody seemed to know about. And at the end of a very tiring day, the police guy said, "Jo hua bahut bura hua." I'm sort of quoting from memory. I realized a lot of Hindus had to go back home in 47. But if he had done it better, maybe they could have gone back home gradually, rather than so suddenly, with so much violence. So it struck me, going back home, I said, this man means well. He doesn't mean badly at all. But this is the history which he's grown up with. And we have a mirror image here, in some respects. This is the history which the new generation has grown up with. That going back home, but they were dislocated from home, as we all know. So, Mr. Husain Haqqani refers to this denialism, this sense of this amnesia about what the 5,000-year history of the subcontinent has been. And he quotes from this Pakistani historian who says that if the Iranians, God forbid, gave up Islam, they would still be Iranians. If the Arabs gave up Islam, God forbid, they would still be Arabs. If the Pakistanis were to give up Islam, what would they be? And he answers that question by quoting somebody else who says, would we be second-rate Indians? No, obviously they wouldn't. They'd be part of the same South Asian legacy or subcontinent legacy that we all share. And that, of course, includes Islam. But if that is a problem which some people have, then one has to accept it. Second issue which I'd like to refer to is identity. There were two observations from Pakistan. One evening in my hotel room, I sat through a television discussion which was loud and rhetorical and all about, quite like what we see on Indian television, about how there was an concerted Indian effort to destabilize Pakistan, nuke it, all sorts of stuff, and how India was this great enemy which was uniting the rest of the world against Pakistan. There were the familiar two generals, one retired civil servant, and so on. And then there was an ad break. During the ad break, a Pakistani telecom company's ad appeared. They were the sponsors of that anti-India program. The model who appeared in that ad was Priyanka Chopra. Okay.
Yes, subversion.
Subversion, absolutely. Okay. Now, the other identity issue I'd like to refer to, had a friend taking me to a local sweet shop. We were going to his house for an evening. He said, come out to buy some mithai. So we went to a sweet shop, which was no different from Agarwal sweets here. There were the same sweets, the same whatever it is, barfis or whatever it was, all over the place. At the other end of the shop were the savories, the samosas and the kachoris here. That's where I realized that, okay, we are different. The kachoris and the samosas were not just aloo samosas and aloo kachoris. There was also beef samosas, keema samosas, chicken and so on. Which got me, left me with decidedly mixed feelings about partition. As a committed non-vegetarian, I said, why do these fellows have to go away? Okay. Now I come to trade. The problems caused by identity and history and the myths of history, or perhaps too much history. Perhaps we have too much history in our part of the world for our own good. The problems created by history can only be resolved by economics. And I had my eureka moment. We all know this in theory, but I had my eureka moment actually outside the same sweet shop in Islamabad. I was waiting for my friend to pay, and I would come out, and I was standing around, and I saw a small restaurant, no different from 300 restaurants in Delhi. It was called Herat Restaurant, and it said there, Herat Restaurant, branches in Herat, Kabul, Islamabad. Now, Herat, as we all know, is practically Iran. It's the western frontier of Afghanistan. Kabul is further east, and Islamabad is, of course, in Pakistan. Now, it struck me that this is a natural trade route, which logically there should have been a Herat restaurant in Delhi or maybe Calcutta or Bombay, and there would have been perhaps if some years ago. Or if you go back to Dilip Kumar, the film actor, his family owned fruit orchards in the northwest frontier and in Deolali near Nasik. So it was one trade route historically, irrespective of how many political territories you divided it into. And in a sense, what's happened is 47 closed that natural trade route. It closed the trade route to India's north. It closed the trade route to India's east. Some years later, Burma or Myanmar decided to shut shop, and the bamboo curtain came up. So a region that provided rice to much of Asia, to much of South Asia, stopped being available. This essentially made a mess of Pakistan. It made a mess of North India, which remains a mess along with Pakistan, and it made a mess of Eastern India. So the only trade outlet we still had in India was to the south and the west, and which is why they remain more prosperous regions than the north and the landlocked north and the landlocked east. And so Pakistan has successfully sort of slaughtered North India and Eastern India, and in the process also committed suicide itself. I went back to this idea of what killing off a natural trade route can do when the Brexit vote happened recently. In a sense, if you go back to 47, what happened in 47 was a Brexit before its time. What had been a natural Schengen zone, in a sense, from Kandahar to Kanyakumari or from Myanmar to Afghanistan, stopped, and had been a natural trading zone since perhaps the Mauryas or the Mughals or whoever, stopped being a natural trading zone. It cut itself into little territories which refused to talk to each other or trade with each other. The only possible route ahead is for those trade barriers to come down and for trade to resume. Can that happen tomorrow? No way. Can that happen in my lifetime? Perhaps. Do I have a solution to convince people to do it, especially in Pakistan? Because I think there will be more acceptance in India, but perhaps less in Pakistan. No, I don't, and neither does anyone on this panel. But we need to have that discussion both in India and in Pakistan. And that brings me to my final comment, my final observation on Pakistan. When I came back from Pakistan, my wife asked me, what's it like? I said, it's a bit like India in the 1970s. And she said, what do you mean in terms of the landscape? I said, well, yes, in terms of the very bureaucratic and PWD type architecture in Islamabad. That apart, what struck me as social gatherings in Pakistan, or in Islamabad at least, is how little economics is taught in drawing rooms. Obviously, the Punjabi in Pakistan and the Punjabi in Delhi or in India are very different animals. The Punjabi in India can't stop talking about money. Ask me. Okay. The Punjabi in Pakistan doesn't. So it struck me that conversations about trade, conversations about making money and commerce and business, perhaps Karachi is different, I wouldn't know, I haven't visited Karachi, are just absent in the heartland of Punjab, at least in my limited observation. And that actually explains the fundamental difference between the two countries today. More than history, more than the so-called differences of history or the commonalities of history, it is the fact that economics, the discourse about economics is just so commonplace now in India, and in my limited experience, so missing in Pakistan, that that needs to be sorted out. I'd like to leave with a set of figures from a 2013 opinion poll on Indian foreign policy conducted in India by the Australia-India Institute, which I was then associated with, and the Louis Institute. This is a small sample size, which is by no means definitive. It may be disputed by some 9 p.m. anchors. I'm not going into all of that. But there were questions on India and America, there were questions on various countries, there were a set of questions on Pakistan and Kashmir. I'd like to point to 4 answers and 4 very interesting numbers, which in my view speak for a newer, younger India, which is both a challenge and an opportunity. 10% of Indians considered the relationship with Pakistan to be strong. 84% considered that relationship to be weak, which is sensible, we all agree. 89% felt people in both countries wanted peace. So peace constituency very high. However, 72% felt trade and economic cooperation was the route to peace. I expect this 72% number would have been very different if the same poll had been conducted in the 60s or 50s in India, because India today is much more trade, economy, jobs driven, even at the ordinary individual level, than it was in the 60s and 70s. We are a different society, we're a younger, more aspirational society. And finally, the last number, 56%, remember 90%, 89% say ordinary people want peace. 56% feel complete peace is not possible. And 48% feel that if complete peace is not possible, this is acceptable, we can live with it. To me, that doesn't show hostility. That shows resignation or perhaps indifference, which, as I said, can be more dangerous than hostility, but it can also be an opportunity. An opportunity that can only be actualized if we look at economics and trade. Thanks.
Thanks, Ashoke. Shikhar.
I think I am just sort of detoxifying myself after an hour's big fight on cow slaughter. So shifting of gears and shifting of ideas is a bit tough, but no, Ashok's been very helpful.
Were you having this? Did this fight involve any bulls, or was it just the human?
No, this fight involved a lot of animal rights activists in the audience who said we'll protect everything, including Nilgais. But nevertheless, it's very difficult to tell activists and Nilgais are not guys, they're antelopes, right? So from zoology to India, Pakistan. So Ashoke has helped by giving many references and by giving many, helping me focus. Ashoke, you said you came back and you said, and somebody asked you what Pakistan's like. You said Pakistan's like India of the 70s. I will tell you what I felt when I went to Pakistan the first time in 1985. That's when Husain and I first met. So, like all the other 30th anniversaries, they came with 30th anniversary of this Badmash and me meeting, right? When he used to be, he'd just grown out of being a backstreet boy in Karachi and a journalist for Far Eastern Economic Review, which has since shut down. Anyway, so when I came back to India, I'd got my first visa to go to Pakistan. I was 28 years old. about 28 years old. I got my first visa to go to Pakistan to cover the trials of Sikh hijackers. And for some reason, because Pakistan wanted to be transparent at that time, they gave visas. These were police reporting visas. So these were trials were going on in Lahore. But I came back dazed. Because relative to India, in 1985, Pakistan looked like India would look to a Pakistani coming into India now. Pakistan was much more prosperous than India. Everything in Pakistan seemed better than in India. Pakistan's roads were better, Pakistan's cars were better, Pakistan's people seemed better fed, better clothed. You went to a Pakistani dhaba kind of place, people seemed to be eating better and eating more. You hardly found any beggars on the street. I'm just being very honest, and as a journalist, Ashok, some of us are of that generation, the telegraph generation. So we had to go to the telegraph office to file our stories. It was a revelation to find a beautiful French Segum machines with the memory chip inside it, right? So you could write your story, and if it didn't go through, you didn't have to write again. In India, we had this horrible Hindustan teleprinter machines. You had to go tan them, and then it would not go through. Then there's मेरा tape cutting खराब है जी. तो क्या करें? सरकार तो ऐसे ही करती है जी, देती नहीं है. So I said, this country has left us behind. And it had left us behind. So when I came back, I talked to many people and I said, how is it? Because my impression was that Pakistanis make nothing. They don't even make a needle. They just get everything from everywhere. So maybe they got it all from the Americans. But the fact is, wherever they got it from, if you looked at data, in 1985, Pakistan's per capita income was 65% higher than India's. It was 65% higher than India's. Today Pakistan's per capita income is about 20% lower than India's. Now you put timing to various things. 83, 84 is when Pakistanis decide, after Operation Blue Star, they've seen mutinies in the Indian Army, that India has certain vulnerabilities. That's around time that Zia begins to see the gains in Afghanistan. And he thinks that if they can do this in Afghanistan to the Russians, we can do something similar in India. So the decision to use terror, it wasn't called terror then, it was called insurgency, militancy, whatever, but the idea of using armed partisans to destabilize a neighbor, that idea led to this economic and I would say psychological decline in a very precipitous manner. And I've seen this decline of pride and rise in insecurity over the past 30 years. We've always been accompanied by somebody in Pakistan. In the past, the guy who accompanied me, I could play games with him. I could get lost, and I'll tell him, किथे गया सी? जो कोई मैंने अगवा कर लेता है, if somebody had kidnapped me, तो तुम्हारा क्या होता? And the guy would say, sorry sir, आप चले गए sir, मेरी जिम्मेवारी है sir. Now would I ever dare to do it? I would do no such thing. If the guy loses me, I'll wait to make sure that he fetches up and doesn't get neurotic. So this is a price that the country and society has paid for a certain policy that General Zia, I'm not even sure at that point the entire army wanted it. The army was punch drunk, the army was recovering from 71, army had got its power back politically also, and as Husain would tell you, anytime that when army has political power for a long time, it begins to lose popularity. Then politicians come in. Then a time comes when politicians become so unpopular, then people say, Fauj ko aane do. And that's when the Fauj recovers. So Fauj had recovered. Zia changed the nature of Pakistani army. Zia changed the nature of Pakistani thinking. And Zia gave everybody the belief that we can win this in the way we won it in Afghanistan. And in the process, if we can also get nuclear weapons, you can make sure that we'll never have any fear of India's superiority conventionally. I think that's the mythology which is behind what's happened in Pakistan. What happened in India, we know the history of, there are epochs in history when peace can be made or when war can be made. 84 is when Rajiv Gandhi takes over. There's a new government, there's a new generation. He has a very large majority. That is when Zia is actually beginning to get weaker in Pakistan because there is some democracy movement coming up. In 86, Zia allows Benazir Bhutto to come back in under international pressure. So Zia is not quite ready. Zia has also brought in some kind of, it's not my expression, it's Itzaz Ehsan's expression, bonsai democracy by putting in a partyless Junejo as prime minister, so that you can admire that little plant, but it doesn't grow deep roots or grows very wide branches. And then Rajiv starts getting into trouble in India. First over Shah Bano, then over something else, then over something else, then over Bofors. Then in the middle, Benazir comes in, and there is a miscalculation in India by Indian strategists on how much power this government would have, because there was euphoria about democracy coming into Pakistan. Right? I covered that summit, the so-called honeymoon summit in 1988, and I still, great cynicism remember the line that, in fact, Benazir Bhutto used, and she said, "Mr. Prime Minister, your family and mine from generation to generation." I said, these two people cannot look at the India-Pak situation in terms of generation to generation. Right? On the Indian side, there was a miscalculation that the real power sat somewhere else. And sure enough, that power asserted itself and Benazir's government was gone. Similarly, on the Pakistani side, even on the side of the establishment, there was a belief that maybe there was a big relief getting rid of Indira Gandhi, that this government will be different, this will take a very different view. In fact, this equation went wrong very rapidly, and Mani, you were in the government, we saw it go from like this to like this, and then came 1987 and brass tacks, etc., etc., etc. So, by 89, again India gets weakened because Rajiv Gandhi goes, there is a coalition government, we have the Mandal issue, we have the Mandir issue. So once again, those in Pakistan, Zia had gone, but those who were custodians of this policy, led by Ghulam Ishaq Khan, they thought you could now continue, and because an opening became available in Kashmir, they said let's do it in Kashmir also. So it's a trap in which Pakistan got caught, and it's a trap, frankly, in which we got caught. Because from then on, I would say from 87 on, our entire approach to Pakistan has been reactive. We have let Pakistan to set the agenda. We have ISI or Pakistani army, the powers that be. We have let Pakistan to make the first moves. Except testing the nuclear weapons first, which Pakistan perhaps did not need to test. Every other move has come first from the Pakistani side. In fact, I should correct myself. Second is climbing onto Siachen Glacier. Although that Rajiv Gandhi did not do, that Mrs. Gandhi did in 1984. So we've been reacting. Now the problem is, let's look at our problems. The problem in India is that because we define our perception of an army-run Pakistan, which we see through the prism of Pakistan Army and ISI, we have denied ourselves any space for maneuver. Because can there be any improvement with Pakistan unless this monster called, quote unquote, Pakistani army and ISI are destroyed? Can you destroy an army? Can a foreign power destroy an army which is professional, we are the 4th largest army in the world, Pakistan is the 5th largest army in the world. 5th largest army in the world with more nuclear weapons than you? It hasn't happened. Can you destroy a nation which has nuclear weapons, a large number of nuclear weapons? Do you want a nation with a large number of nuclear weapons and 20 crore angry Muslims to destroy itself? Because what will we have to handle next door to our borders or next door to our territories? These are thoughts that we never sit back to reflect on. So both sides, unfortunately, now the whole thing has been trivialized between an endless argument. I have grey moustaches also, so I don't mean insult to anybody. But by distinguished grey moustaches on both sides, these retired generals who, I'm sorry, when they were in service, there is no general, forget the eastern sector, there is no general in India or Pakistan who, even by leading an entire division of tanks, covered more than 1 kilometer in 24 hours in the 2 full wars that we have fought. right? I mean, look at the history of both wars. The deepest ingress any side made, one after a 13-day war, one after a 22-day war, was less than 15 kilometers to the other side. So same guys after 45 years come and sit in the evenings. They get paid $500 by either side, and they solve these problems. Uh, so trivialization in India, to me, is a more worrying thing, because India has a much larger stake in the future. I don't want to undermine Pakistanis' wish to have their own stake in their future. But since I live in India, it's a conversation that I can never forget. David Cameron once met some of us editors in a closed-door meeting, and he said quite casually, he said, we are figuring out a way of getting away from this hole called AFPAC. So I said, Prime Minister, think of us. We have to live forever, and our children and grandchildren, next to this hole called AFPAC. We can't even build a wall. The Israelis have tried building a wall. It doesn't work. So I would conclude with the takeaway from what Husain said. He said that many countries, the big powers, have to help. He said in a certain way, Pakistan, to sort of calm itself down. I would say that changing the nature of Pakistani society and Pakistani polity, changing the nature of Pakistan's power structure, needs to be a global multilateral project. Please do not see Pakistan only through the prism of Kashmir problem, because even if Kashmir problem is solved, if we win a war and get the rest of Kashmir, this problem will not go away. Even if we give Kashmir away to Pakistan, this problem will not go away. This problem is much deeper, and this problem is between two countries with nuclear weapons, with populations which are very nationalistic and very angry with each other. So look at a longer term project. I would hope that we see some changes. Anytime something comes up in Kashmir, we get very narrow focused. Otherwise, I don't know what the future is. Since Ashoke started us on stories, I will tell you one that I treasure in Pakistan, in Lahore, in 1990, when Benazir Bhutto when a Pakistani elected ruler starts using very hawkish language, you know that he or she is in trouble and is about to be fired. So when Benazir Bhutto went to Kashmir and he said, Jagmohan ko hum jag jag, mo han kar denge, right? You knew she was going to be fired. So around that time I was in Pakistan. It looked like war will break out any time in the summer of 1990, when a nuclear threat is supposed to have been delivered or not delivered. At the waiter in Faleti's hotel in Lahore, which used to be a government-run dump of a hotel, there was a very old waiter, beard. He came to give us chai, and he said, "ये आप साफ़ी हैं?" मैंने कहा, कहते साहब ये ना जंग होने वाली है। मैंने कहा शायद हो जाए। कहता बुरा ना माने तो एक बात कहूँ। मैंने कहा क्या? कहता जी ये ना हमें जल्दी आज़ादी मिल गई। तो मैंने कहा क्यों? कहता जी हमको मुल्क चलाने आते ही नहीं। तो मैंने कहा अब क्या करें? कहते जी काम करते हैं, अंग्रेज को बुला के 100 साल के लिए फिर ठेका देते हैं चलाने का, तो उसके बाद कोशिश करेंगे। So we can't call the Angrez and have them do it for 100 years. We have to do it ourselves, and as the more preeminent power, as the growing power, as the most respected power, and frankly as the power, I'm a selfish Indian, as the power with more to lose in this. Pakistan has much less to lose now. Pakistan, from being 65% higher in GDP than you, is now 20% lower and becoming lower every year. I'll tell you why. That is double whammy. Because our economy is growing by 3 percentage points, 300 basis points, as bankers say, faster than Pakistan's. And Pakistan's population is growing at twice the rate of ours. We are 1.4 per year. Pakistan is 2.8 per year. So Pakistan's per capita income is in deep trouble. 20 years from now, we could be very different countries. Frankly, you could even hold a plebiscite in Kashmir then. If you hold a plebiscite in Bradford, will anybody go to Pakistan or India? Bradford is a Kashmiri town. They'll stay in UK or Britain or whatever remains of UK by then. So it's very important for us to calm things down and to focus internally and to focus on our development, growth and stability. It can only come if Pakistan gets stability and calm. And there I think it's very important, as Husain also says, that Husain and I have had this conversation many times, that how come Iraq got invaded, Afghanistan got invaded, Iran had so many decades of sanctions, Palestinians had their land taken away by Israelis, but the angriest Muslims in the world are in Pakistan, right? What is the problem? So, so if Pakistani Muslims remain angry like this, and I must say rationally so, armed with all that they have, there are more automatic rifles in the hands of civilians in Afghanistan, Pakistan region than with the armies of Pakistan, India, and Afghanistan, right? Forget the nukes and the rest. Then they are a threat to the entire world's stability. So the entire world has a stake in changing the nature of Pakistan's polity and society for the better. It's not in our interest to go and bomb Pakistan and destroy it. They'll also come and bomb us, right? So, I mean, you must remember, I have to say this very carefully. This is the anniversary week of Kargil. We are celebrating our victory in Kargil. We won in Kargil, diplomatically, militarily, politically. Read General Malik's book. Read the kind of superiority in numbers and firepower that he sought. Total superiority in air, 90-10 in artillery, 16-1 in infantry. So many days of bombardment. Even then, when Indian troops went up there, in the face of that withering fire, Pakistani soldiers were still there, right? And there was hand-to-hand combat. So these are not issues. Our armed forces can very adequately protect us, but these are not issues that render themselves to any military solution or ever will. So think of the long innings now.